Hi everyone, welcome to Casual Watch Talk Sunday Social. Got a full panel tonight for what should be an interesting subject. But before we kick off, let's do a wristwatch check. Mark, you're in the hot seat. What you wearing?
I am wearing the Seamaster Green.
Very nice.
Definitely the best of the Seamaster colours.
Very nice, very nice. Colby, what are you wearing?
I have my Christopher Ward
Ooh.
12X titanium with the SH21 now rebranded CW001 movement.
Awesome, very
Very
cool.
nice.
Dennis, you're up next. What are you wearing?
Oh, I'm wearing the Breguet Classique 5177, dripping with terrible Roman numerals and everything. That would focus on them, but basket weave pattern on this particular. They made like 30 different versions of the 5177. This is one of the basket weave dials.
Oh, very nice. Pete, what are you wearing?
Everyone's coming very exciting. Pretty straightforward. Alpina Sea Strong 300 dive watch. That's basically it.
Very nice, very nice. Simon, what are you wearing?
So I'm wearing the Monzo Model 1,
Ooh,
launched on Friday on Kickstarter. So yeah, kind of road testing, enjoying it. Yeah, very happy with it.
Oh, very cool. And then I will round it out. I am wearing my GMT, my Christopher Ward GMT. Put it on a Barton band to try and match the dial a little bit. Not got it quite right. I have got it on the consort bracelet, but I'm still sussing it out. The consort bracelet.
Well, a Christopher Ward bracelet is both affordable and good value.
Well,
so if you wanted a different style,
seamless link. Well, before we dive into that, just as we're welcoming everyone in, let's do a few little quick plugs. So first, I just want to plug the eBay store. I put the link in the chat if you want to look at any watches that have been on this channel. I'll be putting some other stuff on there as well, not just watches. So like I've got pin badges and hats and all sorts of stuff. So I'll put those on. So make sure you follow me on the eBay. And then Simon, do you want to do a little plug for your Kickstarter that's going on now?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of you guys will probably have heard me talking about this last week in the show. Thanks again for having me on then to introduce it. So yes, the Monzo Model 1 went live on Kickstarter on Friday. It's done. I'm really pleased with how it's done actually in the first kind of 36, 48 hours. As you can see from that, we're up to about $54,000. You know, we've got a pretty steep, a pretty high bar to hit in terms of the funds we need for production. But we're kind of well into that. So just need a bit of a push now to get it over the line. But as you can see from the Kickstarter, it's kind of a faux integrated bracelet design. The end links remove, allow you to fit a conventional strap. And it's a hand-winding movement, Solita SW210 Elaborate grade. So it actually ties in, I think, quite well into the conversation we're going to be having about value, because it is pretty, the spec is pretty high for the price, especially on Kickstarter. So I'd like to think that it delivers really, really solid value.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, guys, check it out. I'll leave. In fact, let me just put the link in the chat as well if you guys want to check it out after this. Very cool. Okay, anybody else got anything to plug? Actually, Dennis, let's plug your welcome. We should plug your YouTube channel as well.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Watches with Dennis. It's in my little title name there, but over on YouTube. So I think it's just /Watches with Dennis, but I usually live stream on Saturday. Occasionally do pre-recorded content. I actually did one on value today, and then you picked this topic, and I was like, well, we'll see if you have space. That's why I have the Breguet on. I don't usually wear dress watches with T-shirts, but
very cool.
I was using it as an example of secondhand value because Breguet falls through the floor.
Yeah, wow. And Simon, of course, your Escapement 24 as well. We didn't plug that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I've got the channel as well. Escapement 24.
Cool. Well, today we're going to have like a general discussion about affordability versus value. Pete, you kind of came up with this topic. Do you want to intro it?
Yeah, okay. So this is my fault. This was like a half-assed theme that went through my mind just before my head hit the pillow last night. Okay, so I'll describe a little bit where this idea came from. I was in a watch discussion a little while ago, talking about a watch I really like, which is a Breitling B01 chronograph. And someone turned around immediately and said, "Well, why would you buy that when for the money you can get the Tudor for $2,000 cheaper?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't want the Tudor. I want the Breitling, and I can afford the Breitling." And they said, "Yeah, but the Tudor's so much better value." Which then, same movement, blah, 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 blah. Which then brought me to this question of how do you buy your watches? Do you buy them by kind of the best value for money? And that is, you say, okay, I've got a ceiling, but I've also got these, say, 5 things I want, and then you buy the cheapest watch that's okay and you kind of like, that meets those 5 things? Or do you say, I've got this ceiling, I buy the watch I want as long as it's under that ceiling? So do you buy the best available or the minimum that hits your marks? I'll put my flag on the ground right now. I am a best that can hit your marks kind of guy. And there was a discussion that we were having online the other day about, for me, what constitutes value. And I did a really poor job of explaining it. And what constitutes luxury. And I did a really poor job of explaining it. But in a way, this argument is what I mean. If you're buying, for me, when I'm buying a luxury item, I buy the very best I can afford. When I'm buying a commodity item like a vacuum cleaner or a microwave oven or a tire pump, I buy value for money, the cheapest I can get that has the specs I need. And to me, that's what distinguishes luxury from commodity items. Over to you.
Yes, it is an interesting discussion. Anybody have any thoughts before we dive into it? And maybe we can do some examples as we go through this. But is anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that Pete brings up the word luxury, because I think that really the words luxury and value just don't belong in the same sentence.
Could not agree more.
I
One is toxic to the other.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, and I think this is a really grey area when it comes to watches, because I think it partly depends on what end of the market you're at in terms of price range. And I think the lower down the price range you get, the more important value is. I think the higher you go up the price range, I think you are going to luxury territory, and then I think value just doesn't even come into the equation. And almost never the twain shall meet, really. Now, actually, I think there is somewhere in the middle where I think you've got brands that are, let's say, challenger brands, maybe some of the micro brands that are pushing up. I don't want to say Christopher Ward, because I don't know, I haven't thought about this to really say, is that a good example of this? But I think brand is very important to a watch purchase. And I think brand and luxury sometimes I think get a little bit confused, because I think they are one and the same, but also at the same time they're different.
Yeah, I think part of it, it depends on what you mean by luxury. If by luxury you mean exclusivity, then that's antithetical to value. If by luxury you mean a certain price point, then that can include value, because go ahead.
No, I was nodding. I was agreeing.
Oh, that's
You're so shocked that I was agreeing.
Someone's agreeing with me. Uh-oh.
The problem.
I must not have said this properly.
I was just going to say the problem with including luxury, the problem with identifying luxury with a certain price point, like 20,000, 30,000 up, say, is then at a certain point, a watch company just becomes a company that overcharges for something. So it's a difference. It all depends on what you mean by luxury.
I think there are, and this is a whole other topic. I think there are basically, I think of there being 4 different types of luxury. And luxury is really just very broadly anything you don't need. And there is no price value on it. So what I would say, and I kind of dispute the idea that you have to be, that luxury has a minimum price floor. For example, I would say almost the ultimate luxury watch is the Moonswatch, in that it is ridiculously poor value. It does, you can buy infinitely better timepieces for small fractions of the price, none of which make you feel as good as the Moonswatch. So with the Moonswatch, you are 100% buying feels, and that is luxury.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think, I know we were having this discussion, and I was thinking that even because obviously all the watches that we are mostly interested in are, I would say, are luxury. And I know we've had this conversation about Christopher Ward before, where they used to really harp on the kind of the value for them. They used to have that value cost analysis, and maybe that wasn't luxury. But I think even with expensive watches, I think there is still, I think you still have to be conscious of the value. Like, you could spend a lot of money on a watch that is, you know, the specs or whatever, or you could get an equivalent for a lot cheaper. So I don't know. I think there's still value in luxury. In fact, Brassic Time says here, so Tag F1 with a plastic case, strap, bezel is eco drive movement for 1,550 price tag. Pardon the pun, it's relatively affordable, but terrible value for money, yet is a luxury product.
Absolutely. In a word, yes.
Yes. And
yes.
That is our
so
thank you.
So someone chose to buy a Tag F1 instead of a Casio FW91 for $15. Why? Because the tag makes them feel good. That's a luxury. And you know what? Makes them feel a little bit dirty, a little bit guilty as well. Even better. Luxury, a lot of people don't realize that the root of the word luxury is the same as the root of the word lust. A luxury item should make you feel a little bit dirty. You should be questioning, should I be doing this? If that thought goes through your mind, should I really be doing this? It's probably a luxury item.
Yeah. So Dennis, what was your, you said you did a topic on this today on value. What was this, the premise that you were going on, like value for money? Or
I mean, well, no, I think broadly I agree with Pete's approach here, though I do think that, and obviously it will vary. And I saw someone in the chat mention, what is luxury varies by the size of your bank account, which is true, but there is a degree of extravagance that needs to be applied. I think. I don't think a sub $200 watch is going to be considered by any large consortium of people as being luxurious, no matter how pointless it is, because the value, or I should say the cost to get in is just not there, quite frankly. What I explored in my little video in regards to Breguet is a concept, and there was an article over at SJX, I believe, back in late 2022 that I really liked that tried to get into this, and it was the idea that watchmaking hours invested per dollar, that is a way you could approach value in the luxury space. And the idea that there are certain brands such as Glashütte Original, Breguet, Blancpain, Zenith to a degree, where the amount of finishing that's applied per dollar is lower than, say, Vacheron Constantin or Audemars Piguet. And so that's where you could have a discussion of where I agree with Pete, like if it's within my price range, I'm willing to consider it. However, it's not lost on me that if a Patek Calatrava is going to cost me $28,000 and a Vacheron Traditionnel, which to me looks the same, is going to cost me 22,000, that there's a value to be obtained there. Or in the case of my Breguet example, where you get Rose engine turned hand done guilloche versus Patek at the same point is going to stamp the dial. Like, if you care about those things, if you care about anglage and that sort of stuff, that's where I think you could have this conversation about value and where the dollar amount comes into play. If you like the designs in general, like I like this and I like that, why not buy the one that lets you get more hand finishing for a lower price point?
Isn't that an extension of the idea that this is function? And I know I'm perhaps stretching the definition of function, but if you're saying it's a pressed dial versus a hand-turned dial, when you're in that regime, what you are aspiring to or even paying for, you would think would be the more sophisticated hand-turned dial. But quite often that's less expensive than a Patek Philippe, to use your example, as a formed dial. So it's kind of blurring the lines between function and luxury there.
I see where you're going. It's a little too stretchy for me. I obviously it's totally subjective if you want to care about those things, but it's not the same as, functionality. Watch functionality is so affordable. We have we have dozens of micro brands that are going to give us a great value for dollar if all you care about is water resistance, relative accuracy, and robustness of case design. Like, I don't even bother learning them anymore. There are so many. So it's at this point, like when Christopher Ward came out with this idea of, okay, well, let's do some bridge work, let's do some higher end polishing, and offering it at a price point that's generally not available. While I didn't like the look of the watch, I liked the idea they were going for, because they're trying to take that value concept, but not in the context of specs. It was in the context of refinement, the space of luxury, if you will. So whether it will work or not, we'll have to see. But
one could argue it's just a spec by another name.
Yeah, that's kind of a good expression of what I was trying to say.
Sort of saying, okay, so you could say that spec is a chronometer rating. You could say a spec is a well-finished interior angle. A spec is 300 meters water resistance. This spec is handmade as opposed to machine-made guilloche. It's just a spec, it's just a different kind of spec, and it's a different way of getting to the end. But it's just a box. It's just a box on a list.
I could see it. It's a little reductive, and I will point out, Vacheron and Patek aren't going around listing on their website how they finish their bridge work and whether there's anglage or not. So they're not listing it like a spec. Yeah,
that in a way, this is like it doesn't really matter what they say. It's really how you pick at, and also there's also a completely and this is possibly how I come to it as well. In that, before I start thinking about, and Simon touched on this earlier when he talked about the absolute importance of brands, before I get into the concept of one's got a printed dial versus one's got a hand cut dial, I've already cut through, but I'd much rather have a VC than a Patek, and I think the Patrimony is a much better looking watch than the Calatrava, and so that is kind of how I make the decision. And in fact, in a strange way, that kind of is my point here about saying, if I'd rather have a VC, I'll turn it around the other way, because I would rather have the VC. But if I'd rather have a Patek, and that's what I want, and I really like the way the Calatrava looks, and I think it looks better than a Patrimony, then I don't care about the rest of the stuff. I don't care about that one's finished. I want the one I want, and I don't want to have to justify it.
I think the problem is all watches have specs. Whether they list them on their website or not, all watches have specs. A watch is what it is, and whether the bridges are finished to a certain standard or not, every watch, some watches are a 70 out of 100, other watches are an 80 out of 100, and the problem is you have some watch companies like Christopher Ward that have pushed the envelope of what you can do with machine finishing. And so now you're having to take that bar, which used to be defined as luxury, and you're having to move it up or say that this other thing is luxury or change the story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so that, yeah, good.
I think there's a really interesting question about how do people respond, and I'd be interested to know here, how do people respond when something that was once exclusive and hard to do and really difficult becomes easy? Do you welcome that and say, now what I really want is that thing that I can afford it? Or conversely, do you now find, oh, well, it's not that big a deal anymore. I'll move on to something else. And I'll be honest, again, that is very much the camp I'm in. Every time I see a micro brand or a Chinese brand or Christopher Ward find a way to make something that I had wanted cheaply and then run an ad, which is like they did on when they ran the 12. Their ad was, made from steel, STEAL, and then the whole copy was about how cheap the watch is and how affordable it is. All I found was all the things that they said that they were now doing really well, I was no longer interested in. It was now find something else that I could want.
Yeah, and we can argue about Christopher Ward's storytelling. But I would kind of agree. As soon as you say steel and doing it cheap, it's not luxury at that point.
Yeah, story for me. The stories for me is what makes something luxury. I think luxury is the story, not the actual, not necessarily the product.
Christopher Ward actually tries not to be luxury. Yeah. I think it says they say in their advertising copy, we are not a luxury brand. We sell premium products.
Yeah, this actually, can I just, this is Mark comment here. So he's mentioned San Martin. Somebody commented on my video that I did for the appalling watch that Lucy sent me in, and they said, "Oh, I can't wait until there's a Chinese homage of this with using a quartz movement." And this is what I think about San Martin. I think luxury is the story, and that's why I don't like watches like San Martin. And then this comment, because it kind of takes away the story. It's kind of steals the story of another watch and then tries to trade as a luxury watch or a specs monster, which I hate that terminology, but. So I thought, well, yeah, you could get a copy of that Portland, but you're not getting the story. You're not getting like the the female-owned brand. You're not getting how they design, how they make the dials. You not. So the story for me is what makes a watch luxury, I would say. I don't know if anybody else agrees with that.
Yeah, I think I when I'm thinking about a watch, I think of it in kind of three baskets. There are three parts of a watch that you buy. Design, execution, and story, or might call it aesthetics, engineering, and story, and how you weight them. I mean, there are people who, if you're a San Martin buyer, you put little to no value on story. And by story, what I mean there would be everything from where the brand came from, what the brand's history is, how the watch was created, but also ideas of authenticity, originality. Those are all story. And when you buy a knockoff, you've decided, and probably before, the reason you bought a knockoff was because you just aren't prepared to pay for those things. You don't value those things. And that's fine. There's a huge market that will sell you very good value for money watches if that's where you fit. Where it gets tricky, though, is if you think that originality has value, then San Martin has no originality, therefore it has no value, therefore it becomes very poor value for money because you're not giving me what I want.
Yeah, I think somebody referred to it in the chat, in the comments, and used the term perceived value, and I think that's a really interesting term in this discussion. because I think that luxury often has perceived value. You perceive something as being a more premium product, even though in terms of real value, it may not be offering some, that higher level of specs or whatever, but it's how you perceive that product, isn't it?
Yeah, and how you perceive that product can go in a couple of different ways. Maybe it's what it makes you feel. It just makes you feel good. Makes you feel nostalgic. It makes you feel kind of, or maybe it makes you feel optimistic, or it makes you just feel good about the fact that you've got this, well-crafted item. Maybe it makes you feel good because it's a little marker, perhaps even to yourself, that you know more than other people, that you're an insider, that you're a real connoisseur amongst, a sea of normies. Or the flip side, maybe it makes you feel good because you enjoy drinking you derive joy from drinking the tears of the less fortunate. And, you want everyone to know that you've got something they can't afford.
Yeah. Yeah. Von Krul, I'll just comment on this. It says Sam Mountain or copyages, they do more original designs. They will sell 10-1 their original design versus their copy. No, the people used to say this about flipping Steinhardt all the time. Oh, they have some original designs. People don't buy a Steinhardt or go to San Martin for an original design. So, but anyway, that's off my soapbox. So, I think we're struggling to. I think a lot of we're getting some great comments coming through here about what is luxury. Actually, somebody mentioned luxury. Just get a luxury dive watch, but that seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Because I suppose true dive watch should be a utility, like the utility.
It's an interesting idea. But on the other hand, in a world where for 99% of recreational divers, diving is a luxury, then maybe a luxury. Maybe the very fact that you own a dive watch is itself a luxury.
Yeah, I've got a friend who goes, or somebody I used to work with that goes all over the world, scuba diving. That's their holiday. That is their luxury, right? Yeah.
So it's unless someone is paying you to dive and you'd really rather not go diving, then it's a job. But if it's anything else, the mere act of diving is itself a luxury.
I suppose the irony is that the most valuable dive watches in the world were the ones that the Comex divers used for a job. If you could get one secondhand.
Yeah, I'd argue that just you were sort of getting to. I think, Sam, that we haven't really defined what luxury is, and I think there's a reason for that. And I think that the reason is that luxury to you will mean something different to me, will mean something different to Pete and to any of these other guys here. And I think it's a bit like, and I'd mentioned brand at the beginning of this. So when I was doing branding workshops with clients, we'd often start by going around the room and asking people to define what is a brand. And, you'd get a whole range of answers. People would stick their hand up and say it's a logo, or it's this, or it's a that, And the kind of accepted definition of a brand is a collection of perceptions in the mind of a consumer. So basically, a brand is what you think of something, or how you perceive something to be. And you might, because it's a collection of perceptions, it can be many things. It can be more than one thing. And I think that's very similar with luxury.
Yeah, I agree. I think luxury is not any one of the things that we have said here. It's all of the things that we have said here. It's just luxury to different people in different ways. So I think you're right. There's two ends of this. There's the end of it from our end, which is I'm a particular buyer. I have a particular view of luxury. This is my personal view. But then there's the view from the other end, the guy who's making a watch. And he's got in front of him, he or she has in front of them all the different people out there with all the different ideas of what might constitute luxury. And they have to choose their buyer. They have to say, okay, so out there's all these different people with all these different ideas. Which of those do I want to sell to? Because you can't sell to all of them. I think that's one of the great mistakes that brands make. They try to sell to everyone, and then I think you need to pick your target. Sort of sort of like lions chasing a wildebeest. You have to pick the small, weak one and pick that one off. You don't just run at the herd and see what you can catch.
Yeah.
I think for me, like going back to our original question about how do you actually think about buying watches? I think for me, it's just simply watches I like. There are watches that I like, and there are watches that I don't like. And for whatever reason, some watches I like for the movement, some watches I like for the design, this and that. Some watches I like for the story and the history. And then among those watches that I like, I ask the question, can I afford this watch? And if the answer is yes, I might buy that. And if the answer is no, then I will not buy that watch.
That's the affordability argument. So does it ever occur to you when you're looking at a watch like that, Colby, and I have no idea what you're going to say here, I'm curious. Does it ever occur to you you've seen a watch, you think, I like that, I can afford that. Do you ever think to yourself, I wonder if someone makes something similar but a bit cheaper?
I mean, I think probably I've compared all the watches in a category, right? Like, yeah, I think it's fair to say, okay, I like the Tudor Pelagos GMT. Well, maybe Longines makes something I like more. Or maybe I like the Rolex GMT Master 2 more. Yeah, so I might say something like that, but it wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to therefore buy the cheapest version of this thing that I can buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that. I think when you first start off watch collecting, you do. I think I did this. I think other people fall into it, and I think I noticed this on Watch Crunch as well. Is where you're so enamored with the hobby, you like certain designs, so therefore you do buy versions of it because you like the story. I think the old Vostok is like that, where people like the story, but actually when you get the watch in hand, they're not. They're questionable.
Pretty hideous.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's why a lot of certainly I did a lot of buying and selling when I first got. I mean, I still do it now, but I've slowed down a lot. But where it's like, and also when you get a luxury watch, I suppose whatever we're defining as luxury. Sometimes if you don't get, or you get the feels, but they're only like temporary. You get the temporary feels. Then I usually end up, selling it. I keep the watches that when I look at them repeatedly, I'm like, oh, that is a really nice watch, actually. Like my Brabant, for example. I wouldn't consider that a luxury watch either, because I don't really like the story. But but I like the watch.
I always laugh about that one because having met the guys, they've got one of the more interesting and more authentic stories. So it's interesting that you don't like that story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I like the origin story of why they set the brand up, but I don't like the story of how it progressed. I think maybe just to get myself out of there. If anybody thinks I'm speaking ill of the founding story, because obviously that is a strong story. So, Mark, you've been very quiet here. You buy a lot of what most people consider luxury. Is that's what you like collecting?
I hope my wife never hears this. I was just thinking that I'm, following on from what Colby just said, a couple of weeks ago when TAG brought out that new Monaco, the silver white dial. Yeah. And I went into the TAG shop and looked at it very hard and then just went, I can't afford it, but I really, really, really want it.
It's a good looking watch.
It's a great looking watch. But I'm going to have to walk out because I can't do it. I was not happy with myself, but okay, my bank account was extremely happy with me. My bank manager, whatever, my mortgage is going to get paid this month because I didn't buy a TAG. But that would be, that's... Do I even think of it as luxury? Because I'm with Pete. The base definition of luxury is if it costs 1 penny more than a $15 Casio, it's a luxury watch. So I can cross luxury off the list. It becomes, do I like it? Can I afford it? And have my tastes changed so that, you know, I'm buying Omega chronographs rather than Casio G-Shocks these days. So, yeah, I would be on the affordable side, but, you know, as Sam will accuse me, is I don't put as much conscious value on story. And I kind of think people say luxury when their heritage marketing runs out. Just to be very cynical, it's you know, luxury is one of the stools that product marketing can sit on. You know, you can have heritage, you can have luxury, you can have utility, you can have value, meaning function for low price. And it's just how you balance the chair or the stool on those different pillars. But you know, if I like something and I can afford it, I've got that really sort of dangerous personality where I'm going to buy it.
Yeah, you mentioned the Monaco, and I think that's an interesting example, because that's one of the watches I think that's got such a fantastic story in terms of its heritage. But the thing that fascinates me about the story of the Monaco isn't so much the whole thing about, you know, it was arguably the first automatic chronograph, or, you know, the square case side of it. It was the fact that Jack Hoyer was just an incredible marketing guy, and he got it onto the wrist of Joe Siffert, and created the first sporting brand ambassador for a product.
If Jack Hoyer was a great marketing guy, Joe Siffert was an average salesman, because he didn't sell many of those.
Yeah. In fact, I used to not like the Monaco because of its not that story, but the way that they for 40 years they had that one image of Steve McQueen, when Steve McQueen didn't even like personally wear the Monaco, but that one image of him from the Le Mans film that they defined the next 40 years of their marketing strategy on it. So I used to not like it.
Remind you of Omega with the moon landings, maybe?
That actually did go to the moon, though, didn't it? It wasn't like Steve McQueen actually wore a Monaco, except for probably, you know, a couple of filming days.
I suppose film. Can I take the discussion sideways for just a bit?
Yeah, please.
And interesting about this idea of a watch ambassador, and I'd like to do a quick poll of, when you see a watch ambassador, are you thinking that are you hoping that person chose that brand and that's why you like an ambassador? Or are you thinking the brand chose that person?
No,
and said that person, whether they like us or not, represents us?
I think you're right.
How do people here? Now, I'm very much in the second one. I couldn't give a shit whether a brand ambassador chose the brand or not. For me, it's all about when a brand chooses an ambassador, they are saying that is the kind of person we think buys our watches. Whether that individual does or not is irrelevant. I'm curious to know what other people think.
I'll start, and then this is a great question, because I think it's this is obviously like nobody will ever know this, it's a myth, but I think it's better if like the person, you know, like Jacques Cousteau, for example, you know, he's famous for dive watches, but if you suddenly found out that like, oh, Jacques Cousteau was being sent like 10 watches a week just so he could wear them on one dive, that kind of like rubbed the, you know, it would, or like he was paid a lot of money to do it where he wasn't really. I mean, they are paid a lot of money, but you like to think all these people actually wear these. What I mean, if they're famous sporting people, then, you know, but obviously celebrities, they obviously are paid for it. Nobody cares if a celebrity. I don't think celebrity endorsements are that strong, really. But you know,
but the brands do, because they keep on doing it.
They are, you know, and it's interesting. I did some research into this for a video I did years ago, and they again kind of like luxury. There are different kinds of ambassadors, and that it's funny you mentioned about sporting people. One of the few areas where it's effective for a brand where this idea of they actually use the product that they advertise, they choose it. One of the only areas where that really resonates and has an effect is in sport. When sporting people use a tennis racket, or when a tennis player uses a tennis racket, when a runner uses a pair of runners, when a cricket player uses a particular cricket bat, that resonates. But when that cricket player goes and buys a watch, no one cares.
I think another example of this, actually. I think that Henry Cavill, I think, has done more to make the Witcher video game and the Warhammer 40,000 cool than he's ever done making Longines look cool. Just because, you know, he actually is a huge fan of these, you know, he plays Warhammer 40K, big like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, isn't he?
So, you know, today we had the Spanish Grand Prix. First 3 drivers on the grid were all sponsored by Richard Mille. Does that mean anybody is going to buy a Richard Mille because you see it on the wrist of some other Formula One driver?
No one ever buys anything because of an ad, an activity, anything. But the research, again, you know, the scientific research here shows that if a tram is trundling down the street and it's got a picture of a person holding a Longines and you don't know who that person is, and then the next second another tram comes down and it's got a picture of someone that you know, then you are going to look at that picture for a fraction of a second longer. And if the next tram comes down and it's a picture of someone that you know and find attractive, you're going to look at that image another fraction of a second even longer, and it's going to live in your memory, even at the unconscious level, a little bit longer again. And then you do that 100 times a day, and you suddenly remember that, you know, tag is somewhere in your mind, and a brand that you haven't seen has gone. And you never even realized you were influenced by the celebrity.
Yeah, we got a great comment here, and this actually leads into yours. I just care if the ladies like it. And that is a big part of the marketing of watches, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And then Michael says, weren't we supposed to buy everything with John Mayer attached to it? Well, that was a thing where I think Hodinkee very much used John Mayer, or Bennett Hodinkee very much chose John Mayer to make him look cool, didn't he? Like, he wanted to be like a cool, like with the cool kids. And I think he used John Mayer to kind of...
well, John likes to talk about watches, which a lot of these examples of ambassadors don't. I mean, Henry Cavill will talk about Dungeons and Dragons all day. I've never heard him talk about a watch.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Simon, this is your background, isn't it? Marketing, advertising, and stuff.
Yeah, and I'd argue. I mean, I think it ties into what Pete was saying, but I think I'd argue that a lot of this is actually about driving awareness. Really, it's not really necessarily about whether you kind of relate to the person who's wearing it. It's more, I think, about just creating a general awareness, because you seeing a famous person wearing something, and that person is appearing in lots of different places, on TV, on billboards, and all of that kind of thing. But it's interesting, actually. I've got an experience that ties into this a little bit. Whereas I met a celebrity who is very into watches. You talk about the John Mayer thing. Celebrity was very into watches, who went to great lengths to make sure that nobody could see what watch he was wearing. So basically, cut long story short, my cousin is a drummer in Russell Crowe's band. Okay. And they were touring last year, and we went to see them in London. And we got backstage and met Russell, had a chat with him. And we were talking, because I knew he was a watch guy, so we got talking about watches. And he showed me, asked what watch he was wearing, and he had a sweatband. And he peeled the sweatband back, and he had an amazing Patek under there. But he didn't want anyone to know what he was wearing. And then I said to him kind of, I wanted to, you only get the chance to meet these people once in your life, don't you? And so I said, oh, look, do you mind, can we get a selfie kind of thing? I thought it looked good on my Instagram. And at the time, he was looking at my Monaco that I was wearing, my Bamford Monaco. And he looked at me and he went, "What, with the watch?" And I went, no, that's not what I meant. And I think he thought I wanted a picture of him holding my watch. And he was like, he was like, no, basically told me to F off. I think probably if I'd asked him again, he would have punched me.
Or thrown a
Isn't
phone
that
at you.
beating Russell Crowe? Isn't it if he shouts at you or punches swings at you, isn't that?
Yeah.
So yeah. This guy saying welcome to Snob Central. For some reason, this guy like hates watch my content. He always writes like ridiculous comments. I don't know, why do you watch this if you don't like the content? Like every live stream, you just have to comment something weird in the comments. At least you're doing it live now. But yeah, like behave yourself, will you?
I got something similar. It wasn't on me. It was actually on another channel, and it got me weird. When people watch a show, and this was on, I can't remember, is it This Watch, That Watch? I can't remember which channel it was, but it was about, the value of copies and blah, 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 whether you should buy a copy watch, whatever. And then someone put a comment up, just buy what you like. And I find myself thinking, what is that for? Yeah. Why are you making that comment? Who cares? And I think it's a little bit like your commenter there. People they don't like the conversation, so they're just trying to shut it down. Yeah. They're trying to say, I don't like what you're saying. I don't like how what you're saying makes me feel. I'm trying to find a way to shut this down.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I want to be heard. I need attention. But yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so interesting comments about the celebrity endorsements. Like, does it make it luxury or not? I think is what I mean. Does anybody find? Dennis, you totally alluded to this before. But I think even G-Shock do this, where they'll have some artisan, like the guy who made the samurai swords, and then they got him to engrave the bezel and stuff like that. Do we see luxury in like the exclusiveness of the materials used in watches?
You definitely see watch brands try and use it to sell watches. That's kind of like one of my favorite Seikos is the SRPK 17, that revival of the original Seiko 5 Sports. They came out a couple years ago, and you might remember Seiko made that a limited edition of 15,555 pieces. The absurdity, you talked about commenters. I actually had a lot of people comment on my first reaction video to that, saying that I was wrong and they were going to sell out. Guys, that watch is still readily available new from Seiko dealers. But the idea is if you can use limited, or you can use a special material, or you can use a special collaboration or a weird strap to something. And I understand, especially when we move beyond limited editions to these other things, they're just looking for something to set themselves apart, because what's been done before is done again, sort of thing, like we run into, like we were talking about Calatravas earlier. There's so many brands that have a Calatrava-esque watch. Affordable brands who do it in steel, all the way up to other Holy Trinity brands that have their own take on the quasi Bajas inspired three-handed watch. And I think trying to stand out is a good way to try and get attention that you'll otherwise just suffocate trying to define yourself doing yet another, I won't even say clomage, Christopher Ward runs into this. When I remember when the 12 came out, everything was, well, this looks so much like a Chopek, and this, and it did. It did with a whole bunch of other things. I mean, it had its own DNA in it, but most of the conversation, at least initially, could not get past what they saw in its base form. And so I think trying to do those things, or just, even if your watch looks like everyone else's, but hey, you use tantalum, so there you go. You're super special now.
But there was a bunch of comments earlier on about 904L and how that was a luxury material.
Yeah.
Did anyone spot those?
Yeah, I did see those, and you would be even more into this, Mark, as a materials guy. But like,
as a materials Nazi, yeah.
As a materials Nazi, but I look at 904 and I go, so in other words, you're buying the one used for like chlorine piping instead of ship fittings.
Yeah, I always think of it as that if you need the corrosion benefits of 904L, you're dead anyway.
But the one I know you guys have talked about on this panel, so not when I've been on, but that's come up before, I think Mark in particular, is the whole grade 2 and grade 5 titanium. And there we go. There's
I
the
need to take a
sign.
lie down. Sorry.
There's the sign.
If it's
It's
not
like, we're paying
grade 23 or nothing.
$4,000. Why isn't it
grade
grade
23
5?
or nothing.
Grade 5 is higher than grade 2. So why $5,000+ watch better not be grade 2? Meanwhile, Citizen's got some of the best titanium in the game, and they're letting you have it for under $500.
Right. That's right. But when Rolex makes the Yachtmaster in titanium, then there's a huge premium on it.
Yes.
The thing is that, Rolex have conveniently convinced the world that they own 904 when it was developed by Omega and Comex, and Rolex had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to follow up on Pete's comment from earlier, and on the other side of that value, like in terms of how I think about watches, there are watch brands that I will not buy because I don't think they're giving us or attempting to give us any value. And there are a couple of examples. One is Doxa, and the other is Squale. Those brands I basically view as brands that are capitalized. I mean, first of all, they're revival brands. I think both of them. And they're basically capitalizing on what they've done in the past, their designs in the past, their history, but they make no attempt to give us any new innovation or push the envelope or develop their design language. And that to me is something that's a huge turnoff. And that's like my favorite thing, or one of my favorite things about Christopher Ward.
Yeah, I can actually feel the same way. I probably one of the reasons why I don't like. In fact, I'll go further. I'm actively repelled by reproductions of old watches. When someone says, "Oh, buy this watch," it's a 1-to-1 reissue of what we made. Well, no, no, take that filth and burn it. If I want the original, I want the original. Apart from that, I want you to take your thoughts somewhere new. And so that's why I have no time for a brand. I don't dislike Doxa, but I have no interest in them. I don't dislike Nevada Grenchen, but I have no interest in them because they're just rehashing old stuff.
Or Furlan Murray for that too.
Yeah, Furlan Murray's an interesting one in that I don't like them, but for other reasons. I feel like I'm being had every time Furlan Murray speaks.
I always wonder with them, where does the money come from?
That's it. I feel like
they make me feel slightly suspicious because I don't know where the money comes from. Because they bought a lot of publicity and I don't know how they afforded it.
It's like when the guys from like AV8 and those other Dartmouth brands were running around pretending to be micro brands when they actually own their own factory and make 100,000 watches a year.
Yeah.
I just thought, you're a lying back bunch of bastards. I don't feel comfortable with you. And yes, very much Furlan Murray fits into that category. I don't feel right about something.
So just to say that the Dartmouth brands have supported the channel in the past, and the views reflected here are not the views of the channel.
Allegedly.
So no reissues ever. I sometimes do get a little bit excited when there is a nice reissue of something. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, I guess the CIA watch, the one that's Marathon re-released, the asymmetric case one, the one that I was looking forward to when Ben Roos, who were like one of the original makers, were like, "Oh, we're going to remake this," and then they made it like way expensive. I do like a reissue, but I don't like when there's a premium on it. I don't think.
I think when people say they're doing a reissue and it's exactly the same as something that they made in 1970, to pick a date, it had better be exactly the same as they made in 1970, with the same crappy materials and engineering tolerances and the radioactive loom that gets them banned. And they're never exactly the same. It's just you're too lazy or frightened to do something new.
Yeah, I do get it. Like, I know other people like them.
There's
people go
clearly
nuts
a
for
market. There's a market
Yeah.
for it.
Fine, you can sell to those people. Where it gets tricky is, to Colby's point, when you feel like that's all a brand is doing and it's not going anywhere. Or even, and this goes back to like that San Martin, the guy who was defending San Martin earlier, saying that they do make, some original watches. When, to your point, Sam, when a brand is 99% one thing and has this little bit hanging off the side, I tend to judge it by the 99%, not the little thing hanging off the side.
Yeah, I always thought about that, like Steinhardt. People used to say, "Oh, they've got some original designs," but yeah, the lion's share of what they do though is replicas almost of Rolex watches. Actually, somebody's mentioning Timex again. Timex has been doing. They're not reissues, are they? They're kind of. Are they retro reimagining of watches that look a little bit similar to ones they had in the past, but they are new watches?
Yeah, I quite like what Timex is doing. And, I'm a Breitling guy, so I'll say, for example, what Breitling's doing with the Top Time is that same idea of, once upon a time we made a watch and this is kind of what it was for, but now let's think about what would that look like if we were making it today. I mean, that I love.
Yes.
But and Breitling do the same thing. They punch out here's an exact replica of the AV625, and that's fine. There's a market for that. It's just not me.
I mean, controversial opinion, but I think that Giro Perigo, they've just recently reissued a dive watch. I forget the name of it now, but that Deep Diver. That one and the reissue of the Casquette are probably the only modern GPs that I actually like. And then they're both old designs, so what's that say?
Well, yeah, it is. GP's actually interesting in that I kind of liked that watch until I heard it was a reissue, and then I kind of went off it. If they'd taken it somewhere, I would have been interested, but on the other hand, I really do like the Laureato with the Onyx dial too, so...
What an interesting conversation. I mean, I suppose Simon, like with you've obviously I know that you've been keeping me up to date with your designs and stuff. I mean, you've put a lot of design effort into giving that watch like a luxury feel, haven't you? You could have not spent the time getting that end link to fit, just right. So it's
got quite a few more grey hairs.
Yeah, but so you spent, as somebody who spent a lot of time invested in making a watch have a luxury feel to it, do you think, what do you think that then in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it sort of ties a bit into this discussion, because the other thing I've done, of course, is I've effectively revived an old brand. But tying into what Pete was just talking about a few minutes ago, I've revived an old brand, but rather than just reissuing an old design that they did, I have tried to kind of look at what they've done in the past, but say, what would they do today? And that was really my approach and my philosophy with it. And I wanted to revive the brand purely because I just sort of fell in love with it, really, and it was a bit of an enigma, and I wanted to find out more about it, and it sort of took me down on that journey. But I really didn't want to just do carbon copies of old watches that they'd done before, because for me that wasn't bringing anything new to the table.
Yeah, I think if you're a massive, if you're Breitling and you're backed by, a private equity firm, and you've got literally hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, then you can kind of do both at the same time, which is, so they're probably about to do this twice, once with Gallet and once with UG. And they'll probably, reading between the lines of what George Kern said, I think their plan is to do both. They'll come out the gate with a reproduction of a watch that everyone knows, everyone's familiar with, everyone feels comfortable with, but then quickly move into, okay, so this is their 21st century offering. And I think that's fine. That's like, I won't buy the reproduction, but I can kind of understand why they're doing it. But again, to Colby's point, you just don't want to get stuck there, and that's all you do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for being so active in the comments. And big thanks to the panel. We had a full panel. Thank you, everyone, for joining, spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us, evening. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk Sunday Social. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.